10 months of bloody carnage have scarred the region in a way that defies simple explanation. 2 brutal, overlapping wars have consumed diplomatic bandwidth and humanitarian resources. Yet the firestorm has wiped out more than 2,600 innocent lives, a number so staggering that it threatens to become just another statistic in the ceaseless scroll of bad news. Beneath the surface of this visible violence lies a darker, more insidious danger. We are talking about 200 nuclear warheads lurking in the shadows of deliberate secrecy, while 400 kilograms of uranium are dragged into the glaring spotlight of relentless international inspection. There is one single international treaty designed to govern this perilous balance, yet we witness the application of 2 grotesquely different standards of justice. How is it possible that a proud nation, one which signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, repeatedly welcomed inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, and proved its compliance with the most intrusive monitoring regime in history, is being viciously strangled and crushed under a campaign of maximum pressure? At the very same moment, another entity sits comfortably on the largest nuclear weapons stockpile in the Middle East, laughing freely outside the boundaries of any meaningful accountability whatsoever. This is the disgusting hypocrisy and the raw power games that are desperately swept under the rug by a compliant and distracted media landscape. Today, we are ripping apart one of the most shameless and blatant double standards in modern geopolitics. On one side stands a sovereign country that made the fateful choice of transparency. It joined international law, and it accepted the harshest nuclear restrictions ever forcibly imposed upon any nation in history. On the other side stands a rogue nuclear power that built its secret arsenal in the desert, with foreign assistance decades ago, a power that hides behind a cowardly policy of so-called strategic ambiguity and enjoys complete immunity because it is a favored asset. This is not diplomacy. This is filthy favoritism. While every single atom of uranium in one country's program is scrutinized like a death row inmate awaiting a final verdict, an estimated stockpile of anywhere from 80 to 200 warheads remains a sacred, untouchable, open secret. There are no questions asked, no inspections allowed, just a wall of silence and unbreakable protection from Washington. The administration loves bragging about its maximum pressure campaign, but let's call it what it really is: maximum pressure on designated enemies and maximum protection for favorite allies, no matter how many nuclear red lines they trample in the dark. The facts of compliance are indisputable. One side played by the rules. It signed the treaty. It endured a brutally restrictive agreement that froze its technological advancement for well over a decade. And what reward did it receive for that good faith gesture? It was met with a cascade of economic sanctions, the targeted assassination of its scientific minds, and now a savage economic blockade specifically designed to choke the life out of an entire population. Meanwhile, the other side never signed a damn thing. It never allowed inspectors anywhere near its secretive facilities in the desert, yet it receives an endless supply of advanced weapons, financial support, and diplomatic cover from the very same administration that preaches non-proliferation. This is not about stopping the spread of nuclear weapons. This is about bullying, geopolitical gangsterism, and the raw exercise of power for the sake of dominance. We will brutally expose this outrageous farce. We will show how one entity is allowed to hide in the shadows while another is punished for daring to be transparent. And above all, we will prove why that nation continues to stand strong, displaying unmatched dignity and strategic genius against this hypocritical onslaught. We are living in an era where nuclear security is no longer the concern of one isolated region. It is a matter of survival for all humanity. Yet in the heart of the volatile Middle East, a shocking paradox has persisted for decades. And under the current watch of the administration, this paradox has only grown more outrageous and more dangerous. For more than 20 years, the world has been bombarded with headlines screaming about the Iranian nuclear program. We hear endless chatter about sanctions, about intense negotiations in European capitals, and about red lines being crossed. The narrative paints a specific picture: the ultimate danger, the rogue state that must be contained at all costs. But let us pause for a moment and look at the uncomfortable reality staring us directly in the face. On one side, we have a sovereign country that signed a treaty on the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons way back in 1970. This country has repeatedly opened its nuclear facilities to international inspection teams. It has shown a willingness to engage in diplomacy even when the deck was heavily stacked against it. This nation has consistently maintained that its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes, and its supreme leadership issued a religious decree declaring nuclear weapons forbidden under the principles of its faith since 2003. This is a nation that chose the path of transparency and international legality. On the other side stands a country widely believed to possess the largest nuclear arsenal in the entire region. Yet this country has never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. It has never allowed a single inspector into its primary facility in the desert. It hides behind a convenient and deliberately vague policy called strategic ambiguity, which is basically a fancy way of saying they will not confirm or deny what everyone already knows to be true. And remarkably, this country faces almost zero pressure for transparency from the international community, especially from Washington. This is not a minor inconsistency. This is a glaring, shameless double standard that exposes how power politics truly works. Why does one get ruthlessly squeezed while the other gets a free pass? Why is one nation punished for trying to play by the rules, while the other is rewarded for staying outside them? Under the so-called maximum pressure campaign, one side has faced wave after wave of sanctions, the assassination of its key personnel, and now a direct economic blockade aimed at choking its economic lifeline. Meanwhile, the other side continues to expand its undeclared nuclear capabilities in the shadows, shielded by American diplomatic cover and an orchestrated silence. Let us be brutally honest about what this truly represents. This is not about stopping nuclear proliferation. If the objective were truly about non-proliferation, both would face the same level of scrutiny and the same set of consequences. But that is not what is happening. Instead, we witness selective outrage. The administration loves to portray one as an existential threat that must be crushed while turning a blind eye to the other's nuclear opacity. It is as if the rules only apply to America's designated enemies and never, under any circumstances, to its closest allies. This paradox lies at the very core of Middle East instability. One side chooses openness and restraint, only to be met with escalating hostility and economic warfare. The other side chooses secrecy and ambiguity, and is rewarded with unconditional support and protection from any real accountability. The mainstream narrative wants you to believe this is simply about security and preventing a nuclear arms race. But the truth is far darker. It is about geopolitics, alliances, and raw favoritism. One is treated as an untouchable strategic asset, a key Western ally that must be protected at all costs. The other is labeled an adversary that must be weakened through any means necessary, even if it means bending or completely ignoring international norms. This selective application of standards does not just undermine the credibility of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. It erodes trust in the entire international system. When rules are enforced aggressively against one player but conveniently ignored for another, the message is clear. Power and alliances matter far more than law or consistency. We must now dissect the shadowy nuclear program of the entity that operates without oversight. We will examine how it was built in secrecy, how it maintains its ambiguity, and how the current administration continues to provide it cover. Then we will examine the journey of compliance, the restraint exercised, and the unfair price that continues to be paid for choosing transparency over deception. The contrast could not be starker. One operates in the shadows with impunity. The other tries to operate in the light and is punished for it. This is the core paradox we are exposing today, a paradox that reveals not just the hypocrisy of Western policy, but the dangerous game being played with global stability, all while claiming to be the champion of peace and strength. The truth gets even more uncomfortable from here. Let us now expose the other side of this outrageous double standard, the side that hides comfortably in the shadows behind its so-called fortress of ambiguity, the fortress that this administration has worked so hard to protect. The nuclear journey started in the 1950s with quiet but massive backing from a European ally. They built the facility deep in the desert, telling the world it was just a peaceful research center for textile fibers or agricultural studies. From day one, transparency was never part of the plan. It was always about building power in secret. Instead of being honest like other nuclear states, this entity invented one of the most dishonest diplomatic tricks in modern history: strategic ambiguity. In plain English, that means they will not say yes and they will not say no while everyone knows they have the bombs. This is not clever diplomacy. It is a cowardly shield that allows the enjoyment of full deterrent power without paying any legal or political price. When the leadership was asked point-blank by a major news network whether they possessed nuclear weapons, the response was a classic dodge. They claimed they would not be the first to introduce nuclear weapons into the region, and that they had never done that. Analysts called it clear in its ambiguity. I call it classic deception, the kind this administration loves to defend. Today, experts estimate the possession of between 80 and 200 nuclear warheads, making it the only nuclear-armed state in the entire Middle East. Yet this arsenal enjoys almost zero international scrutiny. There are no inspectors, no regular reports to international bodies, and no real pressure from Washington. This protection did not appear by magic. Declassified documents from the late 1960s show a dirty little deal was made. Washington promised not to ask awkward questions as long as the other side stayed quiet and avoided public nuclear tests. Do not ask, do not tell became sacred policy. And the current administration has defended this sweetheart deal with even more enthusiasm than its predecessors, repeatedly shielding this arsenal while screaming about nuclear threats everywhere else. The lengths taken to keep this secret are revealing and deeply disturbing. In the 1980s, a technician leaked photos and evidence to the British press. The response was swift and brutal. He was kidnapped in a European capital, dragged back, and thrown into prison for nearly 2 decades, much of it in solitary confinement. That was not the behavior of a confident democracy. That was the behavior of a state terrified of the truth coming out. Here is where the hypocrisy reaches new heights. The entity never signed the treaty. Because it stayed outside the treaty, it has zero legal obligation to allow inspectors in. The administration loves to lecture the world about nuclear non-proliferation, yet it happily accepts this giant loophole for its favorite ally. While maximum pressure is applied for every single gram of uranium under inspection, a complete free pass is given to the hidden arsenal. The talk is tough about stopping nuclear dangers, but somehow that toughness always stops at the doorstep of the favored ally. Threats of bombs and blockades are made against a program under international watch, while a blind eye is turned to a facility no outsider has ever properly examined. This is not leadership, this is favoritism on steroids. Some apologists claim this nuclear ambiguity is necessary for survival in a tough neighborhood. Fair enough. But then why does not the same logic apply to anyone else? Why demand that one side accept the harshest restrictions in history while letting the other keep its undeclared weapons with zero oversight? The answer is painfully obvious. One is Washington's untouchable strategic asset, and under this administration, that protection has become even more shameless. This fortress of ambiguity is not built on strength or moral courage. It is built on selective rules, political protection, and a willingness to look the other way. The entity stays outside the treaty not because it fears nuclear weapons, but because staying outside lets it keep its arsenal without any annoying questions or inspections. And as long as the current leadership offers blanket cover, this fortress remains bulletproof. The international community is left watching a broken system. The treaty was meant to stop the spread of nuclear weapons. Instead, it has become a selective club, a weapon used aggressively against countries disliked by the current power structure, while conveniently ignored for the closest friend in the Middle East. In reality, this nuclear program is a textbook example of how raw power and alliances trump international law. A nation builds one of the most powerful undeclared nuclear arsenals on Earth, keeps it hidden for decades, refuses every inspection, and still gets praised and protected by the world's superpower, all while demanding that its rivals be completely disarmed and monitored. This is the fortress of ambiguity, protected not just by walls and secrecy, but by the blatant double standards and political calculations of those who claim to be the guardians of world order. But for the other side of this equation, the story is the complete opposite and far more infuriating. While one hides its arsenal behind a thick wall of ambiguity and enjoys unconditional protection, the other chose the path of transparency, played by the international rules, and has been brutally punished for it ever since. This nation became a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1970. From the very beginning, it accepted both the right to develop peaceful nuclear energy and the strict obligation to allow international oversight. It never tried to hide in the shadows. It opened its doors to the International Atomic Energy Agency again and again. In 2015, it signed a historic Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, widely regarded as the harshest nuclear agreement ever forced upon any sovereign nation. It agreed to slash its uranium enrichment level to just 3.67%, far below the 90% needed for weapons. It accepted daily inspections at its nuclear sites, allowed continuous monitoring of its uranium mines and production plants for 25 years, and even permitted snap inspections. Independent experts at the time described these terms as extremely one-sided. Yet this nation still accepted them in the name of diplomacy and peace. And what happened? The international agency repeatedly confirmed full compliance with every single commitment. For years, remarkable restraint and responsibility were demonstrated. The supreme leadership had already issued a religious decree in 2003 declaring that the production and use of nuclear weapons is forbidden. This was not empty rhetoric. It was a binding decree that shaped official policy. Then came the turning point. The administration, in one of its signature impulsive moves, unilaterally withdrew from the agreement. It tore up a deal that the other side had honored, that other world powers had supported, and that the agency had verified. This was not just a withdrawal. It was followed by the reimposition of the harshest sanctions possible, the launch of a campaign of maximum pressure, and the threat of military action. All of this occurred while the other side continued operating its secret nuclear program with complete impunity. After this betrayal, patience was shown for years, but eventually a gradual stepping back from some of the limits began, not to build a bomb, but as a measured response to Washington's broken promises. According to the latest reports, there is now a stockpile of approximately 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%. Let me be clear. This level is still well below the threshold required for weapons-grade material. The weaponization threshold has not been crossed. In fact, even the Director of National Intelligence for the United States told Congress that there is currently no manufacturing of nuclear weapons taking place. Despite all this, the drums of war continue to be beaten with claims that a bomb is on the verge of being obtained. This is the same tired narrative that has been used for years. A narrative that conveniently ignores the actual undeclared arsenal while obsessing over every move of a transparent program. Here is the brutal irony that the administration refuses to acknowledge. Transparency was chosen, and punishment was the result. The more open the program became, the more tightly it was squeezed. Every inspection report that confirmed compliance was met with new sanctions and new accusations. Meanwhile, the entity that has never signed the treaty, never allowed inspectors, and never provided any transparency, receives blanket protection and billions in military aid from the very same administration. This is not about nuclear security. This is about selective punishment. The targeting is not because of an imminent nuclear threat, but because of a refusal to submit to regional dominance. There is a desire to maintain an independent foreign policy, support regional allies, and resist the kind of total submission that Washington demands. In the past 10 months alone, direct military clashes fueled by the excuse of preventing a nuclear program have claimed over 2,600 lives. Yet specific, verifiable evidence of a rush toward a bomb remains suspiciously absent. Intelligence reports continue to show that the political decision to build a nuclear weapon has not been made. Despite relentless pressure, extraordinary strategic discipline has been displayed. The leadership has remained cohesive even after high-profile assassinations. The military and scientific infrastructure has proven far more resilient than the maximum pressure campaign ever anticipated. This is a nation that has survived decades of sanctions, isolation, and threats, yet still refuses to kneel. The contrast could not be more damning. One built its weapons in secret, maintains them in secret, and uses political cover to keep them secret. The other joined the international system, accepted the toughest restrictions, and still gets labeled a dangerous rogue state. The administration loves to portray itself as the strong defender of the world against nuclear threats, but this version of strength is strangely one-sided. Crushing pressure is applied to a country that has shown restraint and transparency, while a complete free pass is given to a country that operates entirely in the dark. This is not consistent policy. This is raw geopolitical favoritism dressed up as national security. The story of one side is one of resilience in the face of hypocrisy. It is the story of a nation that chose to engage with the international community, only to discover that the rules are written by the powerful and enforced only against the inconvenient. While one sits safely behind its fortress of ambiguity, protected by unwavering bias, the other continues to endure economic warfare, military threats, and relentless propaganda, all for the crime of refusing to disappear quietly into submission. This is the painful reality of today's nuclear politics in the Middle East. One hides its weapons and is rewarded. The other shows its cards and is punished. The hypocrisy is no longer hidden. It is on full display, and we refuse to look away. The contrast we have just seen is not an accident. It is not a misunderstanding. It is a deliberate, calculated double standard. On one hand, we have an entity that built its nuclear weapons in secret, refuses to sign the treaty, bars all inspectors, and maintains a stockpile of up to 200 warheads in total darkness. On the other hand, we have a country that signed the treaty in 1970, accepted the most draconian nuclear restrictions in history, allowed daily international inspections, and still faces relentless accusations, sanctions, and military threats. This is not about non-proliferation. This is about who gets to break the rules and who gets punished for following them. Independent experts have pointed out the obvious for years. Strategic interests always trump international law. One is seen as an indispensable partner. The other is seen as a troublesome adversary that must be contained, weakened, and if possible, regime changed. In this worldview, rules are not universal. They are weapons to be used selectively against enemies and ignored for friends. This selective enforcement exposes the deep cracks in the current international order. The treaty was designed to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, yet it divides the world into two categories: those who signed and must obey strict rules, and those who never signed and can do whatever they want. The loophole was cleverly exploited, and that exploitation has been enthusiastically defended. Even international courts have acknowledged that legal restrictions on military nuclear capability only apply when a country voluntarily commits to them. No commitment was made, so technically the treaty is not being broken. But here is the uncomfortable truth that the administration refuses to face. Just because something is legally permissible does not make it morally acceptable or strategically wise. When one country is allowed to maintain a secret nuclear stockpile, while another is strangled for enriching uranium to levels still far below weapons grade, the entire system loses credibility. The maximum pressure campaign is the clearest example of this hypocrisy in action. The withdrawal from a working nuclear deal, the reimposition of crushing sanctions, the authorization of assassinations, and now the push for an economic blockade aimed at oil exports, all under the banner of preventing nuclear proliferation. At the same time, the political and military backing continues to flow to the entity whose nuclear program remains completely opaque. This is not leadership. This is blatant favoritism disguised as foreign policy.